Hello everybody, welcome back. So today's video is my presentation on Vincent's ear, which I know a lot of you have requested to be uploaded to YouTube, so I'm going to do that. And I hope you enjoy. This is a separate recording. I'm doing this all alone, just because the recording from the live stream wasn't exactly very good quality. So I'm doing this again, and I hope you enjoy. So I'm going to give an overview first about, what I'm going to talk about. So first I'm going to talk about the events leading up to December 23rd, 1888, which unfortunately now was a few days ago, but, still a memorable event in Vincent's life and very much talked about today. And then I'm going to talk about the actual incident. I'm going to talk about the girl who received his ear, and then I'm going to talk about the aftermath. So it shouldn't be too long, but I will give you a very basic and some inside facts. So yeah. So I'm going to start with the arrival of Paul Gauguin, which obviously was an important part of, kind of the leading up to Vincent's ear and that event. Gauguin arrived October 23rd, 1888, almost 2 months exactly before the incident with the ear happened. So Vincent had been trying to get Paul to come to the Yellow House for a very long time. Actually, all through the summer, Vincent had been persuading him, and Paul had kind of been on the fence about actually coming to Arles. And he had kind of said, yeah, I'm going to come, no, I'm not going to come. So it kind of went back and forth. It wasn't actually until the last week of October that Paul finally said that he shipped his trunk and that he was actually coming to Arles. So for Vincent, this was a very kind of, how do you say it? Like, it was a very kind of, short notice. So something that they did, which I can show you here, is that they actually did a portrait exchange with each other before they actually started living together. Now, this wasn't the first time that they had met each other. Paul obviously has accounts of Vincent and his encounters with him in Paris, where they probably met before, and so they did a portrait exchange. So as you can see, we have a self-portrait dedicated to Paul Gauguin by Vincent himself on the left, and then we have self-portrait with portrait of Emile Bernard, which is Paul's portrait to Vincent on the right. In the middle, we have the Yellow House, which is where they would live together and paint together. Obviously, Paul is a very important factor in terms of Vincent cutting off his ear, and we will get kind of more into that later. So next I'm going to talk about kind of the downfall of the relationship, because to be honest, they never really had a great relationship. I wouldn't even say they were friends. I know Paul was not really into the whole friendship thing. Vincent, on the other hand, had a lot of expectations that the coming of Paul would, create and start this artist colony and the Studio of the South, in which artists could come together, live together, and paint together. And it was kind of like this dream for Vincent. Obviously, it never came to fruition really, because of what happened and kind of Paul's very quick escape to Paris after Vincent cut off his ear. So, but it didn't take long for their relationship to sour, especially when they were living together. I mean, something to know is that the Yellow House was not that big, so you know they were living in very close quarters, and obviously they saw each other a lot. Another interesting fact is that the only way to actually get to Paul's bedroom, which was the guest room next to Vincent's, was to actually go through Vincent's room. So Paul kind of could never actually really avoid Vincent when they were living together. Obviously, there were times when the weather was bad too, when it rained, and Vincent, and Paul were stuck together in the Yellow House painting. So, their relationship was never exactly great. I mean, they found some ways to be more compatible with each other in terms of living and living expenses. But really, the truth is that Paul never actually wanted to go down to Arles. Rather, he was persuaded by Vincent's younger brother Theo that in exchange for Paul actually going down to Arles, um, Theo would actually sell his paintings and give him the profit from the sales. And that was really what was making Paul go down there. He didn't actually like Arles. He said it was the filthiest hole in the south and just really was not fond of it. He wanted to go back to Paris. Before this, he was actually living in Brittany, which is northern France and, kind of the part of France that stretches out under England or near England at least. So in terms of the relationship, so it really started to, as I said, sour towards the end of November of 1888. So they had been living exactly almost a month with each other, and Vincent actually wrote in a letter, not in November, but in very close to the date that he would cut off his ear. He said, "The discussion is excessively electric. We sometimes emerge from it with tired minds like an electric battery after it's run down." So that really kind of gives you a hint of of the relationship that they were having at the moment. Um, and yeah, also Paul started to get really worried because Vincent started to get all these weird habits, and he started to become very eccentric, and he started to do these kind of strange things around the house. And they, in general, they fought a lot. They fought a lot about especially painting and ways of seeing. Is it better to paint from memory? Is it better to paint from what's in front of you? They argued about a lot of things. So their relationship was never fully there, really. As much as people would like to think that, this was an important kind of meetup between two artists. So, what actually happened on the night of December 23rd? Well, the events are very, very blurry, and we don't know. And I don't think we will ever know exactly the events. Obviously, there is accounts of what happened on December 23rd, but as I said, there's a lot of gaps. So very long after, in uh, Gauguin wrote a recollection, sort of a diary made into a book of just some of his experiences, and one of those experiences was living in the Yellow House, and also what happened that night. Now, I want to remind you that we can't fully rely on Gauguin. He's just not a reliable subject in this, and in really anything, to be honest. Even in his diary, he kind of admitted many years later that it was sort of facts and fiction. So it kind of gives, it doesn't make it a fully reliable source. But he did write of what happened this night, and in his words, he writes, "I had already gone almost all the way across Place Victor Hugo, Place Lamartine, when I heard behind me a little step that was very familiar, quick and jerky. I turned at the very moment when Vincent rushed at me with an open razor in his hand. My look must at that moment have been very powerful, because he stopped, and lowering his head, he ran back in the direction of the house." There's a lot of He also wrote some other things about, things that happened the previous night, supposedly that Vincent had thrown an absinthe bottle or glass at him, that Vincent had been kind of acting very strange, that at one point he put a scrap of newspaper in his hand saying the murderers fled. So it's very kind of scattered in a way. But the story goes that after this, supposedly Vincent went back to the Yellow House, and this is where he actually mutilated his own ear, and then he wrapped it in newspaper and took it to a girl at a brothel who I will get more into later. But supposedly he gave her that his ear, and she opened it and fainted. And interestingly enough, it's remembered that when he actually went to the brothel, he told the girl to keep it safe, something along the lines of that, or remember me. We're not really sure what he was trying to say. Um, but I've included also a local newspaper scrap that was actually published a week later in the local newspaper that kind of summarizes what exactly happened in the words of the police. And also I've added two paintings, the brothel, to kind of give an example, to kind of support my evidence, and what I'm trying to say with some paintings, particularly the brothel from 1887 and Man in a Red Beret, which is supposed to be Paul Gauguin, which was made in 1888. And actually, it's interesting because Paul did write that when Vincent went to the brothel, he actually wore a red beret, and he kind of pulled it down over his injury so no one could see. Obviously, the blood is going to camouflage into the beret, so I guess that was sort of a mechanism to keep his injury secret. But yeah, it's very hard to say exactly. Moving on then. So then we get into Vincent's motives and theories, which can get a little bit, how do you say it? It can get very kind of obscure, especially the theories, because we obviously don't know what Vincent was thinking. Vincent didn't even know what was happening to himself. But there is two main theories or motives that are very plausible, that have been discovered more and thought about more lately. And the first one, or which have always been the main kind of ideas, and one is that Vincent was very afraid uh, that Paul was going to betray him, which he did, because Paul, after this incident, he fled back to Paris, and he had wanted nothing to do with Vincent. So it's really, people believe that Vincent was afraid that of Paul's betrayal, um, that made him, actually want to cut off his ear. Another idea is that it's very possible, and we know that that day Vincent got a letter from his brother Theo announcing the engagement to Johanna Bonger, um, who would in which they would marry in April of the next year. But the announcement of their engagement is likely to have set Vincent off, because obviously Theo was relying on Vincent for financial support the whole time, and most of his life, and especially his painting career. And obviously, the thought of an engagement might have triggered Vincent to cut off his ear, because he was afraid once again, along the theme of betrayal, that Teo would stop financially supporting him. And if Teo had financially stopped supporting him, then it was um, for sure that Vincent wouldn't be able to paint, because Vincent got all his supplies and living expenses from Teo. So there was definitely a big fear that Teo would stop supporting him with with the engagement to his wife. So then we get into theories, and some theories are more obscure than others. I want to say that these are not my theories; these are theories that have been thought of in the last century. One of them is that Vincent might have read an article in the newspaper about Jack the Ripper. If you don't know who Jack the Ripper is, he was a murderer in London who killed prostitutes and mutilated their bodies, and um, he had actually become very known, even though nobody actually knows the identity of Jack the Ripper. But at that time, in 1888, especially the fall, there were numerous cases of him mutilating prostitutes. Specifically, there was one instance where he mutilated two prostitutes' ears. So a lot of people, some people at least, think that possibly Vincent got the idea to cut off his ear from reading these articles, which was very actually quite popular in the French newspapers at the time. So there's another theory that Vincent might have gotten the idea to cut off his ear from watching bullfights. Because if you don't know anything about Arles, it has a big arena, and it's still there. And usually in the summer, there is a lot of events with bulls. I actually saw one when I was there. Not exactly bullfighting, but rather a different type of event. A rather non-violent event with bulls and people, and so people think that because Vincent said that he had actually been to some bullfights during the summer and maybe the spring. People think that because there's this thing where the toreador cuts off the bull's ear, so people think that Vincent might have gotten the idea to do that from watching the bullfights. And then the last one is even more obscure, and maybe we don't know, but um, it's very easy to think that Vincent thought of himself as Christ, and that he thought of Paul as Judas, and that there is the story in the Bible of Judas bringing soldiers to Peter, and Peter cut off one of the soldier's ears. Um, Obviously, this is very obscure. I don't know if I fully believe this, but there's like people believe that Vincent was, as I said, like Christ, and Paul was Judas, and Paul was obviously in a way betraying Vincent by leaving to go back to Paris. I don't want to get too much into that because I'm not extremely religious, and I don't really have that much knowledge of religion or the Bible. But I just wanted to give you a decent understanding of that theory. So these are some of the theories and motives. So then we get onto the story of Gabrielle, or Gabby, and this is where I start talking about the girl who actually received his ear, because a lot of people always have questions about who the girl actually was. Um, so the girl in question who received Vincent's ear was Gabrielle Brilletier, and she was an 18-year-old girl at the time. Most people think that she was a prostitute, but she was actually now confirmed to be a brothel cleaner. If you read Bernadette Murphy's book, Van Gogh's Ear, it gives a good chapter about Gabrielle and how it's more likely that she was a brothel cleaner than actually a prostitute, judging that she was way too young at the time to actually be a certified prostitute. Um, but her story is very interesting, obviously. So, what had happened was that earlier in 1888, before this event, say January, she had actually been bitten by a dog that was supposedly infected with rabies, and she had to go to Paris for a life-saving vaccine, which at the time was not that old. It was quite new. So she got a life-saving vaccine at the Institut Pasteur, and when she came back to Arles, she had to start working to make up for the lost finances and how much the treatment actually drained their financial situation. Um, so I think it's interesting because there's a theory that Vincent always had pity for the poor and the unfortunate, and especially women who had lots of problems or some sort of traumatic event, and this would be no different that Vincent would feel for her, seeing that she had a big scar on her arm from the treatment, from the bite. Um, but it's also thought that she might have cleaned in the vicinity of the Yellow House, not in the Yellow House, but at the Café de la Gare, which was the night cafe. And it's probable that if she did work there in terms of cleaning, that she probably met Vincent, saying that that was a place where Vincent liked to go to have a drink or something to eat. Um, but it's interesting because a lot of people know her sort of as Rachel, and Rachel is actually her brothel name. Her real name was Gabrielle. And what actually happened to Gabrielle after this? Well, she actually lived a full life. And it wasn't actually until Bernadette Murphy actually went to meet her descendants that they actually figured out that Gabby was actually the girl who received Vincent's ear, and I guess it was somewhat supposedly mortifying to find out that one of their family members was the one who received Vincent's ear, and they asked their identity to be kept a secret. Um, so yeah, that is the story of Gabrielle or Gabby. So what actually happened in the aftermath? Well, we'll start with Vincent. So Vincent obviously had no recollection of what had happened after uh, he had cut off his ear. That night, obviously, he lost a lot of blood and he was not conscious, and very much he almost died. But actually, when the doctor actually asked him, why he actually, self-inflicted this upon himself, he said it was a purely personal matter, obviously not wanting to say, or just that he had no recollection of what had actually happened, seeing that it was sort of a blur and that it happened really fast. We know that Vincent went back to the Yellow House after delivering the ear and kind of went upstairs and collapsed on his bed. The police were there the next day. Paul fled. Obviously, he waited until Vincent showed some sign of life, just to prove that he was not the murderer, and that he did not actually kill a man before he actually went back to Paris. So, something else that happened as I was talking about Theo before. Theo actually had to uh, rush down to Arles in the middle of his happy engagement and his time of bliss to see Vincent, and he actually went to the hospital, and he actually recounted it to his fiancee at the time in a rather kind of sad passage. He said, "I found Vincent in the hospital in Arles. The people around him realized from his agitation that for the past few days he had been showing symptoms of that most dreadful illness of madness in an attack. When he injured himself with a razor was the reason he was taken to hospital. Will he remain insane? The doctors think it possible, but daren't yet say for certain. It should be apparent in a few days' time when he is rested. Then we will see whether he is lucid again. He seemed to be all right for a few minutes when I was with him, but lapsed shortly afterwards into his brooding about philosophy and theology. It was terribly sad being there, because from time to time all his grief would well up inside, and he would try to weep, but couldn't. Poor fighter and poor sufferer. Nothing can be done to relieve his anguish now. But it is deep and hard for him to bear. Had he just once found someone to whom he could pour his heart out, it might never have come to this. In the next few days they will decide whether he is to be transferred to a special institution, and as I don't yet know how much I shall have to do in all this, I dare not make any plans." So Theo went down there very much the day after he had gotten the news from Gauguin about Vincent, and unfortunately he didn't stay too long because he had to get back to his fiancée and their engagement party. But Theo was obviously very much nervous about the possibility of Vincent dying, seeing that they couldn't live without each other. And in another letter, I didn't put it. Theo, sorry. Theo actually was prepared for Vincent to die, and in words, not exactly, he said, "Oh, if he has to die, so be it. Obviously, I'm gonna be heartbroken, but that's what it is." Thankfully, Vincent didn't die yet, but Theo obviously went back like the day after Christmas or Christmas. Um, so that is Teo's account. So now the last thing I'm going to talk about is the actual ear, because a lot of people have theories and debate about the actual ear itself. particularly how much did Vincent actually cut off, because some people say it was the lobe, some people say it was actually the full ear. We know that Vincent slashed through an artery, which must have hurt like hell. But it wasn't until a few years ago, actually, that Bernadette Murphy, the woman of the book Van Gogh's Ear, actually found this document that was actually written and done by Felix Ray for an author in the 1930s. And here Ray obviously is much older now, in the 1930s, but obviously he still knew Vincent, obviously on a personal level, seeing that he was Vincent's main doctor in terms of treatment for his injury. Um, and she found this in California, and it was a document, as I said, that Ray actually did, and he actually drew a little sketch of how much of the ear actually was cut off, and you can see that it's pretty much the whole thing. I think there's just a little stub left, so that kind of clears up that question. So here on the bottom we have a picture of Dr. Ray, who was a young man at the time and just starting out, but obviously very with the modern medicine at the time. And something that most people don't know is that Vincent's actual ear was put in a jar in formaldehyde, and it was placed on the doctor's desk. And one day, unfortunately, the ear was just gone. I think it was probably thrown away by the cleaning service, but really that's what actually happened to Vincent's real ear. It was just disappeared one day off the doctor's desk. There's an interesting recollection from Dr. Ray's younger brother, Louis Ray, um, who actually happened to see Vincent the day after his ear was mutilated, and he actually recounted watching his older brother, patch up Vincent's injury, and he actually wrote, "He wore a dirty cloth around his head like peasants do when they have toothache. My brother was on the point of carefully untying the rag. When I also noticed that the cloth on one side of the head was drenched with blood, I watched with interest and saw to my horror that the patient was missing an ear. The organ had been separated from the head with a single clean incision. Using hydrogen peroxide, my brother Felix carefully loosened the primitive bandage that, because of dried blood, had stuck to the injured man's cheek." So that kind of gives you a bit of an insight into the type of treatment that Vincent actually was having at this time. Um, and yeah, so that is about the actual physical ear. And I hope I cleared up some questions that have been debated over the past, particularly how much of the ear and what ear did he actually cut off. Well, Vincent actually cut off the left ear. That's also been debated. Which ear did he actually do? He actually cut off the left ear. So I'm going to end my presentation by giving two recommended books and the sources that I use. The first one, as I've mentioned in many of my slides, was Van Gogh's Ear by Bernadette Murphy. I highly recommend it. It has a lot of deeper insight into 19th century treatment, and exactly what Ray might have done, and also gives a very good, entertaining story of Vincent's ear and that whole situation if you're interested in learning more about that. And then the second book I have is The Yellow House by Martin Gayford. It's called Van Gogh, Gauguin, and Nine Turbulent Weeks in the Yellow House, and that's a really entertaining book also that kind of really delves into the relationship of Gauguin and Vincent. So I highly recommend these two books if you have time to read them. I know people have thanked me for these recommendations, and so I hope that maybe you will invest in it too. Of course, thank you so much for watching. It's been a joy to be able to talk to you, and I hope that I can do more of these in the future. So, thanks everybody.